Hope everybody is well. Is this mic on? All right? Cool. So yes, I'm Ellis from Atos. I am an accessibility lead. I describe myself as white male, late 30s, bald, goatee, blue shirt. And what a fun topic this is going to be, right? When we look at processes, I'm going to talk a lot about processes, and it's sometimes not as fun to talk about, but hang in there, right? And I'll move on. So Lisa kindly stole my thunder. So I want to start to talk about whose responsibility is for accessibility. And where this talk comes from, right, is I was a project manager. I still am a project manager. That's my bread and butter. That's where I started my career. And I went on to a client, and I took over a project. And 2 weeks into the project, I got a accessibility audit given to me with over 300 defects. First of all, I said, what is accessibility? So I didn't know what to do. I was like, oh, right. And then I started reading the audit and looking at all of the problems, all the issues. And then I started thinking, as a project manager, why didn't people plan this in? Why did the designer make that mistake? I've been in university. Did they not learn that at university? How did the developer not do that? What were they doing? And then I was like, why was the tester not doing it? Why did the tester not test it? So in this meme, I was worried. The meme is actually of Spider-Man, but I was very worried about copyright, so I didn't use it. I got AI to create this one. And there's 8 personas on this one. Is it automation tools, designers, AI, the tester, the developer? Is it a project manager? Is it the content writer? Is it a business analyst? They're all pointing at each other. Because what I found out at the very start, I was very naive. And everyone there's still a misconception that accessibility is not my issue. It's not my problem. It's his, it's hers. But when in the software development lifecycle, we have a whole team working on building this software or service, and everybody has a role to play with. So today, I'm going to try to talk about, if we just cover what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to give you a quick overview of the software development lifecycle. I'm not getting into too much detail on it. And what I really want to talk about is how to build accessibility in the process. Because I think in this room, we probably all know the reason why it's important, why we're doing it. But I really want to try and give little actionable tasks that you can take away to actually how to do it. And then I'm going to talk about the roles and responsibilities within the team of like what a designer should do, what if there's a business analyst should do, and what your project manager should be doing, and what your product owner should be doing, and really ground it in somebody who's doing the work, okay? So I'm going to say this is a typical software development lifecycle, right? It's not as easy as this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to talk about, like, I think you've all heard shift left. This is essentially shift left, right? If you start thinking about accessibility in the planning stage, you are really embedding accessibility as a priority. Then I'll talk about requirements, and this in the requirement stage, this is where we can start making accessibility really measurable and actually testable later down the line, so we can document it there. Then I'm going to look at a bit of design. I worked with a lot of designers for 3 or 4 years. I've got a soft spot for designers, learned so much from them, but I'm going to say how we can build it, and then some things that I've noticed in my experience, what designers are missing, okay? And then we're going to have a look at the build process and build development, whatever you want to call it. I'm not a coder. I feel like a bit of a fraud when I'm teaching coders how to code when they've probably done it at university. I don't know. But what I'll do is I'll talk about some of the theory and some of the actions we can put in the build stage to help them developers. And then I will talk a bit about testing and just have a look at what the testers can do to help them. I know at this point, a lot of in this software development, like, oh, this is quite a cycle between implementation, build, and test. It's quite iterative, so I'm just going to point that out. Sometimes it goes backwards and forwards, but I'll try and touch on that. And then I want to talk about the thing that we probably forget to do, which is the maintenance and release, because if we're building software or a service, then we put it out there. Great, job's done, right? We don't have to deal with it anymore. We've done our work off, we'll roll on other projects. But there's really stuff we should do in this point to really help future-proof it. Okay, so we will get into it. And start with planning. So we've got any project managers, product owners, engineers in. So this is the sort of thing that I think they'll need to start doing is we all start building our project team. Planning and scoping is probably the most important, and this is as far left as we could possibly put it. Make accessibility a goal from the start. Make it a core requirement of your project regardless. I know we're going to have conflicting things in our development, for example, cybersecurity is always going to be there, right? Try and get accessibility as one of them core parts as well. Document it so when your stakeholders see your documentation, it's written in there and they might ask the question. Now, I'm a project manager and there's a couple of project management tools that I have in my arsenal to help with me. In your project plan, when you're planning it, write accessibility items as line items in your plan. So when you're documenting your plans, put line items like testing, every single line item that you can think of, put it in that plan. So then what that naturally does, you have to allocate resource and budget to it. Now this is the biggest issue I always have, is trying to allocate resource, tooling and budget and arguing with stakeholders about it. And I think some nods here is one of the biggest things. But if you put in your project plan, you scope it all out, you've justified why you're doing it, and then you tell your peers and stakeholders what the budget's for, and you can point it in your plans, it's written in stone. That's how I do it. And then when you're in the plan stage, you start to meet your team, because I work in consultancy, you have lots of different teams from different countries, everywhere. I always try to use that couple of first meetings to scope it out, get people to understand it. So I try and involve an expert if I can. Now I know that is difficult sometimes. People don't have accessibility SMEs on tap, right? But what I try and do is I try to scope out anyone within the team or a discipline, ask the question about accessibility, and someone might pipe up, because 9 out of 10 times we're all very helpful people, I think. We always want to try our best, so someone will pipe up and then start giving their experience and start talk about it. And then that starts promoting that accessibility mindset throughout the life cycle of a project, where everyone's thinking about it. And then it's a really good one as well. People might go, what's accessibility? Like I did 10 years ago when I was a project manager. You could give them training. You could start to talk to them and provide training. There's so much free training online. This is all for me, self-taught, okay? So you can try to provide like training if they're a designer, point them towards design training. There's loads out there. And what's really good about the training part is you're planting the seed for them for the future. So when they roll on future projects, they can do this collaboration piece. Like, I know a bit more about accessibility because in consultancy we move around. So it's all about spreading that knowledge at the very start as well. And I always do the bit mundane. When you're a project manager, you've got to document and communicate your risk. As a project manager, one of the other tools we have is a risk log. So what I always do is I try to document at least a couple of risks. A risk about excluding users if we don't do this. And then I always have to write about non-compliance. It's not about compliance, we all know that, but I always write a risk about non-compliance and what are the legal implications if we have a software out there. And then once they're documented in your risk log, you have to maintain and monitor that risk before it becomes an issue. So that's another one. And then I'm going to touch on it, but I think there's been quite a lot of talk and it's quite new. Procurement. Put accessibility questions in your procurement if you need a software or service whilst you're building your product. If you put the questions in procurement, the market has got to respond to them questions. Just think, if everybody started writing procurement questions in every single thing, the market will naturally get better. Because I've been on the receiving end of these where I've had a software where it's actually not as accessible as it should be. And I've had to answer these questions, and I'm like, oh, we're probably not going to win this because of how low accessibility it is. So if you can, in the planning stage, if you need to procure the software service, ask the questions, okay? Okay. Now the requirements. So really I'm talking about in the requirement stage is your project managers, your project owners. If you have user researchers or business analysts in the process, that's excellent. And this is really their roles and responsibility to start documenting this. And we really want to make this part really where we can make it testable and measurable, okay? The first thing I really want to do is understand your audience in the requirements. There's no point in sitting around a room and not thinking about your audience and who the software services are going to be used by. Is it very specialist? Is it going to be a small user group? Is it gov.uk? the UK population, and really start trying to document and get insights from the user behavior, their needs, their pain points. And this is where the user researcher will really help try to get them from it by using interviews and surveys, okay? And then that really brings to life why we're building the software service. And then the best part about requirements, actually the boring stuff, is actually write them down. And this is the best way of getting them, and it'll really help in testing, I'll explain later, is if we start gathering the requirements, writing them down as acceptance criteria. Now, I always write acceptance criteria, and I always try to, wrong one. I always try to write at least 2 acceptance criteria. Has everyone used the given, when, then, the behavioral driven technique? A couple of notes. I always write them in this way, and I always write 2. I always write one for keyboard only navigation, so that's somebody who can see the screen, maybe motor disability, and they only want to go on all the clickable elements on the screen. So I write one for potentially that persona. And then I always write another persona for a screen reader user who wants the whole screen read out to them. Because there's a big distinction of how different users interact with the software. So I always write 2. And of course you can write loads more. For example, if you're creating a video or transcript, I always write one for a transcript and closed captions. But a word of warning on this one, you could write 10. You could write 20 for all different personas, all catch-all. But when you give that to your developer, they panic a little bit when they see about 20 acceptance criteria. And I've seen it done where developers are inflating story points in the process if I've given them a list of 10 acceptance criteria for accessibility, as well as everything else. But that's a bit of the education piece where that's the education piece where you're taught the developer going, this is actually your job. You should be doing this. If you code your code properly, you'll probably hit all these personas. So just a word of warning on that one, but that is the best way to make them testable and measurable at the start. And then again, this is a good point about again, collaboration. Get your designer, get your developer, and your tester in a room and talk to each other, because many times I've worked with clients and projects where they literally don't talk to each other, they literally throw it over the fence. Great, there you go. And then what this does is if you get these couple of disciplines in the room and look at the requirements, they can ask questions. Okay? So sorry I'm going on quite quickly. Now soft spot, design, okay? So designers in the room? Hey, loads, okay. Best thing to do, which you can, 3 things before I go on some examples of what I've seen pitfalls, okay? Document accessibility guidelines. Now on the internet, there's so many accessibility checklists out there. Go and get one. And then tailor it to your solution. There's loads of generic ones out there. Get it and tailor it. Make sure it fits your service and product. And then what's good about once you've documented, you could probably use that on different projects. You can take it with you. Keep it safe. And if you can, I know sometimes you can't do this if you're on secure projects, government projects and stuff like that, is try to get early user testing in the development phase. In the design phase, and get real experts and potentially lived experience to really point out the barriers. So I remember doing one, I sat in it, and we got early user testing of a page, and it was a screen reader user, and we watched him read it, and then he hit the start button and continued. But what happened? But underneath the start button was all the information for a screen reader user. And the designer was like, oh, why did it go start? There's a start button. But underneath the start button was all the information for a screen reader user. That early user testing showed us that, and straight away moved that button underneath that instructions. And then what I also do is I put an accessibility design review gateway in the process. So once the designer's done all their designs, before the designs get to the developer, I have a meeting or a checkpoint in there where, oh, it would have been me, I did the design review for accessibility to make sure no issues go to development. So there's really, that one there is a really good way. I think that number 3 has given me the best response for designers, is putting that gateway in. And I got to talk to a lot of designers, and I got to be able to point out potentially an issue. So that would save a lot of time. But I've got a couple of examples, and we've seen a couple already, of what common mistakes are, okay, for designers. Now, color contrast, we can all police color contrast. Every time when I'm looking at something, I'm watching the TV, I'm reading a book to my child, I'm like, that color contrast is quite low. Everybody within the team can really police this without having the tools. There is obviously extra tools, we've seen one before. We can all police this. I think WebAIM, a non-profit organization based in Utah State University, they analyze 1 million homepages every year. Color contrast was the biggest issue. I think out of 1 million pages, 83% of them had a color contrast issue. And for me, as a project manager, I was like, do the designers not see this? I thought that would be like the first thing they'd do. So just remind color contrast. We can all police it by just using our naked eye if we can. Typography. There's many websites where I've looked at it and I'm like, I can't read that. I can't read what that text is because they've used terrible font and then italics. So always have a look at typography. Just make sure it's very plain and nice. Because the amount of times I've been very surprised that big brands use poor font, and it makes a massive difference. And again, avoid color as the only indicator. I think we've had a couple of examples this morning. But again, if it's red for fail, which is the most common ones we see, isn't it? Red, fail, green, pass. To someone who's colorblind, they can't read that. So there's got to be a second alternative, so right, pass, fail. One thing that I've noticed a lot, toggle buttons. Have you seen toggle buttons? Have a look at them. They're always just color. I don't know how they pass at all. You look on your phone, they're all just color, and some are. One toggle button I've seen was white on white, and I was like, is that on or off? What does that mean? So when I'm just designing toggle buttons, I really get into it and actually put yes, no, tick me. And then what I see designers never do, I hope you do in his room, but they never design a focus indicator. So when it gets to the developer, they just put the default one on. And obviously the default browser one does its best, but it's not great. If you've got a design system, that's not your design system, there's an issue there. So I would always recommend to design a focus indicator so you can give it to your developer. They'll thank you, I'm sure. Again, a couple of ones I've never seen designers do is, I was very surprised about consistent navigation, where they design a couple of different headers, which I thought was mad. So always design a good primary and secondary navigation and keep it the same on every page. I've done audits where they're different on pages, and I was very surprised. I had a couple of arguments with designers about the next one, about the logical reading order, like for example in documents. I ask my designers to, when they're designing the content, especially if it comes to your content writers, is put the headings on. Is it H1, H2, H3? Because if you don't, the developer's got to guess. The developer might get it wrong. They don't know the content you're creating and how it should be structured. So I always try and get my designers to do that in their designs, to try and state that. Now, responsive design. I always get my designers to design for 3 different viewports: mobile, tablet, and desktop. Now, even if it's not a requirement, I would recommend taking the time to do it up front. Because I've worked on 2 projects now where they didn't design for 3 viewports. It gets released. It's only desktop view. Their main users, the exec team, use iPads. And the software didn't respond to an iPad well. So an executive's really going to complain about that, aren't they? Right? And I know I'm going to say probably 1.5 years on, I still know that software hasn't got 3 viewports. So think how long it takes to retrofit responsive design. So if you do it at the start, do it up front, it's going to save so much time and effort down the line. Now, forms and error messages. I've not seen designers design these or write error messages. So what I get the designers to do is always design for a happy path and an unhappy path to state what the error message is and make the error message the same on the screen where it is. Because I've seen error messages where they're using the default error message on a browser in tooltips. Don't use tooltips. And then I put ones where they're completely on the far right of the screen or the far left of the screen, not underneath the error message where it is. Okay, I'm going to move on to build the development. Front-end developers, back-end developers. So I'm not going to pretend I know how to code, right? But what is good practice for yourselves, and hopefully you already do this, is create your own component library. And why I think this is really important is I was doing an audit of, it was a form, it was 3 pages of forms, okay? And all 3 pages had a drop down on it. And when I was auditing testing it, I got very confused because the drop down gave me 3 different outputs to a screen reader. And I really just couldn't understand why. I thought, am I testing wrong? So then I took it to the developers. And what it turned out, it was 3 different developers working on the 3 different pages, and they all just created a drop down how they thought to create a drop down. Just think how long it took them to do it. And I just thought, why didn't you just create one? There's 3 people have made effort of creating a drop down, completely different, and they're all wrong. So what we did at that point is we got them to delete 2. I got rid of 2 of the worst, and then we concentrated on that one, and then put it across the 3. And then they went, why don't we just create the library? So then they looked at all of their components and did that. But then I just thought that was 3 developers doing that. We could have just had 1. So that the cost for that project was up because you had 3 developers. And then I also try, if we can, is use pre-built accessible components that are out there. So what I've seen is when app developers are creating custom drop-downs, if you can, the apps themselves, Android and iOS, have these pre-built tools in. If you can, instead of making a custom your own, if you can, just use one of the Apple's or Android ones. Then what I also get them to do is do a peer-to-peer review, where you get somebody else to review your code or get automation to review your code. I think a word of warning, again, the WebAIM 1 million report this year, I think it was released 4 weeks ago, there's a new trend, vibe coding, that's out, where they're getting large language models to help them write code, and it's making web pages more complex, and it's bringing in more accessible errors, because they're getting large language models to help them write, so they're not checking their work, they're relying on the large language models to do a bit of their work, and more errors are creeping in. So that's why it's more important at the moment, until large languages get better, to review your own work or get someone else to review it. And then, of course, there is some Linda tools and accessibility tools that are out in the market. ActionDQ is one of them where it can check your code as you write. And I know there are financial costs to the project, but if you've got the budget, your developer's probably going to thank you. But what I see from the developers a lot of the times when I'm working with them is they don't collaborate. So the tester has tested their work, there's an issue, throws it over to the developer. The developer goes, reads the ticket, then fixes the issue, then passes it back, and it's got another issue. Because the developer could ask the question of the tester, what do you mean? How does it feel? Can you demo it? Can you explain the issue? What's the user impact? And once the developer's done that sort of ask them questions, they've got a better understanding of the issue. And also, what I see from on the other side is when the designers give the developers the designs, the developer doesn't ask, what is this component you're thinking of? What is the user interaction you want in this design? Is it a checkbox? Is it a radio button? Because they could look the same on the design, but to a screen reader, a checkbox and a radio button are completely different components. The developer could start asking them questions about what, to the designer, what's the interaction you want? Okay. Testers. Got testers in the room? Great. So this is normally the last line of defense, I'm going to call it. This is where a lot of the times I see accessibility as the first checkpoint for accessibility, and we're kind of far down the line at this point. And this is where it starts to get, if we put accessibility testing in, is the only thing in the process, it's got to go back. I think when we see a design issue, it's got to go back to the designer, then to the developer, then back to the tester. And so what I always do with testers is, I've got a lot of sympathy for testers, especially when I do accessibility auditing, and that's where I started. Automation testing is great. It's got its purpose, but I always give the rule of it only covers 25% maximum. People say it's 30, some people say it's 40. I'm quite on the low end where I say it's 20. And again, what we've probably done is we need to do manual testing. And that's where, remember in the requirements section, where you wrote the acceptance criteria in the behavior-driven technique, the testers can use them acceptance criteria to do the manual tests. So it'll actually force the tester, if they don't do manual, it'll force the tester to do manual testing. Now, and then another story, I was on a project and they said, oh, we're just going to do automation testing. And I told them the issues. I said, it's not going to cover everything. And then, so then, a bit of argument to and fro. I went, all right then, write a risk in your risk log that you've just accepted you're only going to do automation testing. Write it as a risk, take it to the board. Lo and behold, the board did not accept that risk. And the board, the stakeholder group, said, no, you have to do manual testing in this project. So that's another reason why, in the planning stage, I write the risks up front. I did it in retrospect then, but it really got the stakeholders to really understand why manual testing is exceptionally important. With manual testing, I always test with at least one screen reader. I always do keyboard-only navigation and then screen reader navigation, because there's two different ones. There's a lot of times where I've seen testers, they've wrote very big, long issues, but they've tested the wrong way. They've used the tab key for a screen reader when they should have been using the up and down arrow key, so they're wasting the time. So that's why, again, in the requirement stage, I always write two personas so they know how to test for that persona. And then it'll speed up their process. A lot of times in projects, I've seen they do not test with voice command. I always argue with my voice command, always do it, but I highly recommend it if you can, is always try and put that in. And then also we have scaling, test for them free viewports. They never do. I see a lot of times where they don't test it and then it goes down. And then as a tester, really document the issue. That'll really help your developer understand the user behavior, why it's failed. Okay. Now quickly, the bit we always forget. Right, great, our software's out there, we've done. But what I always do in this release and maintenance section is always try to make sure accessibility persists over time. Future-proof your own product, right? I always say communicate your compliance and open a feedback channel. And this is where, if we open a feedback channel, this is where you've got support teams or whoever does your social media, anything like that, to get all the feedback from customers. Educate your support team of what that actually means. If someone says accessibility, what does that mean? So that's upskilling your support team. I always try to put periodic design reviews of your component libraries, because software's getting developed very quickly. People forget to look at their own component library and periodically review it and update it. Make sure that it's always updated. So I always put a checkpoint in there. If you build a new component, put it in the library, check it. And then I always put accessibility regression into the process, regardless if it's a back-end change or a front-end change. That's got nothing to do with accessibility or components. I always put accessibility regression testing in to make sure the developer hasn't broke something as a checkpoint. And then I always say, publish your commitment. I know we're talking about accessibility statement here, a bit of a legal term, but I always see the accessibility statement as your commitment to the public. Yes, it might have issues, but then you put your roadmap in there. So I always say, do that, and it shows outwards that you're committed. 3 key takeaways. Start accessibility as early as possible. I think we know why. I always say, if you don't, it's going to take 3 times as long and cost 3 times as much. I think that's on the conservative end. People say 10 times. If we put it in the start, shift far left as possible, it'll make lives a lot easier down the line. It's a shared responsibility. Designers have got roles, developers have got roles, the business analyst has got a role, the project manager has got a role. Everybody in the software development lifecycle who touches it has some sort of role to play with. And then just remember why we're doing it in the first place. I think people forget why we're doing it. It's really about breaking down barriers and just making our software and services as easy to use as possible. Thank you. So what kind of questions? If you didn't write notes, you can take a screenshot, a picture of that. I just put all of the, I say my key actions are call to actions in each part as a little nugget. Use them. You'll get a lot further if you use them. Any questions? We've got time for questions.
Hello. We've got one from the Slido. So for procurement, what do you ask that truly interrogate whether third parties are accessible rather than them just saying, oh yes, of course, we're accessible?
Yeah, I'm a bit mean. I ask really detailed questions. So I'll give you one. I was procuring a learning management system. And now I know learning management systems, you can put loads of content on there regardless of what e-learning is. I asked them, how do they monitor the content on their platform? So a learning management system has lots of different e-learning from different companies. There's so many varieties. I asked really detailed questions about how do you police accessibility for your product? Because I knew the product was quite accessible. So I went a little bit further going, how do you interrogate others uploading e-learning to yours? So it's about being mean as possible. Make the question as hard as possible. I've done loads where the questions are like, wow, that's very detailed. Another one I've done, testing. I actually just asked, when you do testing of your software, what assistive technology do you use? And then you can tell if they just Googled it. And you can tell if they don't know what that means in their answer. And then when you're looking at the responses, and if it is a response that is really washy, you know they've not put time in it, where they probably just went into a large language model and asked for a good answer. You can always read it. So yeah, probe them on what assistive technology they test with is quite a specific question. And then ask how do they police accessibility in their organization? And that goes a little deeper into the question. So it's not as generic. Hope that answers the question. There's 2 examples. Any more? Any more? Go for it.
Hi, Simon. I was just wondering, with the accessibility statements, some organisations are really reluctant to put them up because they feel that it exposes them to risk. Have you experienced this yourself?
Every time.
Yeah.
Every time. It's the biggest. It's like, oh, they're going to hold us legally accountable for this. My answer to that is yes, you are. Don't be afraid of that. You are committing to the market that you're going to be doing something about it. And I state as, yes, there is a legal risk here. There is a risk. But I'd rather you do it than you didn't. If you don't do it, you're hiding something. I always flip it on the other side about it. It's like, if we don't do it, you're hiding something, aren't you? And then in the procurement stage, where I always look on their website to see if they have an accessibility statement. So it's always a measure there. Yeah, unfortunately, that can be held as a risk, but I always document it in my risk log that we have to do it. And then this is where I also do the education to, I guess, the legal department, or whoever deals with that thing is, I actually educate them about the risk and why we're doing it. There's a lot of help out there to kind of get away with the legal implications of it, or how to really, really well word it. I've seen some that are exceptionally well worded, where it's like a get out clause for everything. You just accept the risk. Accept the risk because it's your commitment, is my answer to that. And don't be shy about it. Like, I've had so many legal arguments with lawyers, and I'm not a lawyer. I don't speak their language. I've had so many arguments about it, but I'm like, we're just putting a commitment out there, and you're not hiding something by doing it. Because I've seen some accessibility statements where there's a list about that long of issues, but I prefer seeing that because I know they've done their due diligence. And that's when I'm speaking to lawyers about it, is I explain that. Was that a long-winded answer?
No.
Yes, accept the risk. Don't be shy about it, is my advice on that. Any more? Thank you.